Today, we're going to talk about some unexpected good news for Democrats as we look ahead to 2024, and I interview the Bulwark's Tim Miller about whether there's a lane for anti-Trump Republicans in the GOP, whether Biden's age would actually prevent him from getting votes even when put up against Trump, and the impact that Threads will have on Twitter. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're watching No Lie. So let's talk about some good news here. We've gotten a raft of court decisions recently that may very well allow the Democrats to flip the House in 2024. So just days ago, in the single most consequential decision this cycle, an appeals court in New York ordered the congressional maps to be redrawn. Now, here's a bit of background. New York relies on an independent redistricting commission to create its maps, but ahead of the last midterm cycle, when that commission met to draw its district lines, it was deadlocked along party lines, Republicans and Democrats. So it got to the point where the commission wouldn't even meet anymore, and so the Democratic legislature took over the process and drew its own lines, and those lines obviously favored the Democrats. Republicans sued them in court, and New York's highest court sided with the Republicans, opting to give control of the map redrawing process to a Republican-leaning neutral map maker. And what followed was that Republicans flipped 4 congressional seats in the 2022 midterms, thereby proving what a Republican-leaning map it was. But in this most recent court decision, the judge ruled that the lines drawn by that third party were only meant to be temporary, meaning it'll now be up to the Independent Redistricting Commission again to meet what they're calling forthwith, which basically means now. And if the commission deadlocks again, which may very well happen, it'll then be up to the Democratic-controlled legislature to redraw the maps. But this time, the court won't appoint a third party to step in. And of course, Republicans have promised to appeal the decision to New York's highest court, and that's called the Court of Appeals, but it's actually basically New York's Supreme Court. And whereas this is the same court that had ruled against the Democrats ahead of that 2022 midterm cycle, remember that Governor Hochul has since appointed a new liberal judge onto the court, and also the chief judge, who's now also a liberal, was one of those judges who actually dissented from the 2022 decision. So while nothing is certain, it does look promising that Democrats will be able to undo this Republican gerrymander in New York, and that is a decision that could net Democrats between 4 and 6 seats in the House in 2024. And remember, Republicans currently only have a 5-seat majority. So that alone may be enough to flip the House in the Democrats' favor, but there was another court case all the way up at the Supreme Court that could lead to another round of seats for Democrats. So in June, the Supreme Court decision in Allen versus Milligan struck down Alabama's congressional map for violating Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act that prohibits the dilution of the voice of minority voters. And so as a result, the Alabama legislature is currently redrawing its congressional map with a second minority-majority district that black voters can elect a candidate of their choosing in, meaning that we're certain to see another Democratic seat in Alabama. Milligan also impacted Louisiana, which will now also have to redraw its maps to allow for a second minority-majority district as well, which means that there will be a Democratic seat added in that state. So that's 2 so far. The decision also impacts Georgia, most likely, whose congressional and legislative maps both violate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. So the judge in that case challenging Georgia's current maps have requested briefings from both parties in light of the Milligan decision. Also in Texas, there may be as many as half a dozen districts impacted because of that decision. In total, there are currently 32 active Section 2 lawsuits across 10 states, but it really does underscore the extent to which Republicans have relied so heavily on rigged maps to take control of the House this cycle. A House, by the way, that has plunged our government into dysfunction because Republicans have decided to use their majority to obsess over Hunter Biden. So whereas the Democratic House last cycle passed the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Package and the Gun Safety Law and the PACT Act and the CHIPS Act and ensure that the U.S. would have the fastest economic recovery of all G7 countries and the lowest inflation rate of all G7 countries and the most jobs added in the shortest amount of time in U.S. history, now we're stuck with a Republican majority whose top priority is gas stoves. And look, I do want to draw one caveat here. None of this is to say that Democrats have this thing in the bag. What this does is gives us the opportunity to flip these states, whereas before, these districts were basically scientifically engineered to ensure that Democrats could not win. But we still need a turnout. Remember, if the Republican nominee is Trump, that guy is a turnout machine on the right. So while Democrats overperformed in midterms when Trump wasn't on the ballot, we may not have that luxury in 2024. So we've got signs of life here, but it's still on all of us to make sure that we bring this thing home. Here's a preview of my interview with Tim Miller. Do you think that there is any room for an anti-Trump candidate in the Republican Party right now?
No. the anti-Trump group is about 15%, right? And if you just look at the top three people, I was early on this. I was like, if there's anybody in this field, maybe someone new will come in, but in this field, if there's anybody besides Trump or DeSantis who has a chance, it's Vivek. Because what the voters want in the Republican Party right now is MAGA. Yeah. And they want somebody that smells MAGA, that sounds MAGA, that is not one of those old-timey Bush bulwark people, right? Like, they don't want anybody who even has the scent of that on them. Okay, so here we are right now today. Trump's around 50, DeSantis is around 20, Vivek's around 10. He's now cleared the former vice president, Mike Pence, in multiple polls, okay? Yeah. So that's 75-80% of the primary wants Trump, DeSantis, or Vivek. Yeah. That's the party.
Which is just some iteration of Trump, maybe Trump himself or Trump without the legal baggage.
Yeah, Trump imitator without the legal baggage who's younger, right? Like, that's it. That's 80% of the party. So 15 or 20% want somebody else. 20 is the absolute max. And it's just these guys can't wake up to the reality. And so now, just this weekend, it's Pence, Scott, and Nikki are all going into Iowa to go to an event with Tucker where it's like the crowd's like throwing tomatoes at them. Tucker's making fun of them for being pro-Ukraine. They haven't accepted the reality of what has happened to the Republican Party. And my big message is to all of my old friends in the Republican Party is like, wake up to the reality. It's not what you wish it would be. It's not what you want it to be. Yeah. Like, the party is what it is. And the voters want MAGA nonsense.
But I mean, there has to be some degree of being able to see more than 5 inches in front of your face and recognizing what happened, to your point, in 2022, recognizing what happened to Trump in 2020, recognizing what happened to the Republicans in midterms in 2018. Doesn't your former party recognize that, like, MAGA might work within the base, but to get to that point where you actually have to win the primary, you are making yourself radioactive in the general? No. Or is it just like we're in an era of no compromising, total polarization, and it just you just win or and you don't compromise at all?
Well, so the answer is twofold. At the top, like the strategists class, they recognize it.
Of course.
But they're scared of the voters, right? Yeah. And they're still trying to get their cuts on their TV buys so they can buy their beach houses, right? And so, they don't want to go out and say the truth, because as soon as you do, then you get branded a rhino, never Trumper, and you don't get work anymore, okay? Yeah. So the smart people recognize this, but can't do anything about it. The voters don't recognize it. And here's why. Because in 2015 and 16, a bunch of people like me and the Republican strategist class said to the voters, ran ads, you can't support Trump in this primary because he can't win. Hillary will beat him. I said Hillary would beat him from jail. I thought I was being cheeky. Wrong. So these people...
Turns out you were just a few years too early on that one.
Yeah, exactly. So these people all looked at the supposedly smart establishment class that they had kind of grown to resent anyway. And they're like, you guys told us he couldn't win. You were wrong. We were right. He won. Yeah. And now you go ahead to 2020, and most of them believe that it was fraud. So you can't go to them with logic and say this isn't working, because they would say back to you, no, we won in 16, we won in 20, and the deep state stole it from us. Right. So why would we go a different direction?
To watch the full interview with Tim, click the thumbnail right here on the screen, or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. You can also click the link for the audio version of this podcast on the screen. And finally, to see more of my content, click that link to subscribe.